Streaking Grime is an amazing tool to have to really add some dirty and grimy realism into your model. Now there's a couple of different brands who make their own version of Streaking Grime. Now previously I always thought that the one you chose was kind of based down to brand loyalty rather than a different effect. So to test this out I got hold of two of the biggest hitters. So first of all I got the Streaking Grime from the Vallejo Environment series, and secondly the AK Interactive Streaking Grime. Now these are two very different brands, both well known for their high quality effect paints. But how different actually are they? In price, in effects and the way they handle, and most importantly, will it give you the effect and the result that you're looking for in your project? Well, there's only one way to find out. Okay, so today we're going to need a test subject that will allow us to see these two Streaking Grimes side by side. So therefore I'm going to use this terrain piece from the KillTeam Octarius set, mainly because it has some fine detail in there that you might see on a smaller model, but also on this model I can easily do half of it in AK Interactive and half of it in Vallejo, and then we can compare it directly like for like. Now I am really intrigued to see how these two different Streaking Grime products, how they handle over a base colour, but also over a metallic colour as well. So after priming this with a black Mecha primer from Vallejo, I'm going to dry brush on quite a bright silvery colour. Now you might think that silver is a bit OTT for general metal work, but the reason I'm using this is that I found that when you're using a lot of effect paints, it can really dull down that colour. So therefore having that really bright silver as a base, and then when the effect paints bring that brightness down, it brings that brightness down to a much more realistic tone. Now the metal on the structure is extremely silver, and also I want to bring it down a little bit, make it a little bit more weathered before I apply the Streaking Grime. So over all the silver areas I'm going to apply a layer of the light rust wash from Vallejo. Now I quite like this stuff, it's quite an underrated product, you don't see it used or talked about very often, but it does give quite a nice kind of battered weathered effect. But also looking at this counterweight piece, you can almost create kind of a streaking, rusty streaking effects with it as it is. Okay, so that's the base of the metallics done. But the next bit, I want to try it out over a painted surface. But for this model, I want to do it quite a light colour so we can really see how those Streaking Grime effects work. So therefore, I'm just going to give a very quick couple of coats of a light beigey kind of colour on both these tanks. Try and make them as equal and comparable as I can. Okay, so that's all now dried, and I've spent a little bit of time adding in some of the extra details on the model. So at the moment it doesn't look too bad, but it looks very, very clean. Let's change that. So once again we're looking at two different types of Streaking Grime. Now the first one is going to be from Vallejo, and this is the one that I've been using for years, to be honest. The other one is brand new. As you can see on the actual bottle, I've not even opened this one yet, so this will be a true experiment. The main thing between these two is that the Vallejo is an acrylic and the AK Interactive is an enamel. Also worth pointing out is that the Vallejo is a 40ml bottle and the AK Interactive is a 35ml bottle. So the AK Interactive is a slightly smaller bottle. So now there are a number of ways you can use Streaking Grime. If you know of any other ways that you can use this stuff that I'm not covering here, then please let me know down in the comments. And the first one, and you'll see this a lot being used in tabletop miniatures, especially for that grim, darky kind of effect, is more of a reductive technique. So you layer it on, let it dry slightly, and then using some water, in this case because it is an acrylic base, and then either a cotton bud or a bit of damp tissue paper or whatever else, just wipe it over and remove the top layer of the highlights of the raised areas. Now obviously bear in mind that acrylic will dry a lot quicker than an enamel based product, but normally you've got a little bit of time before it cures completely. So what I'll do now is get a little bit of kitchen roll, dampen that and try and remove some of that Streaking Grime. Now it should give a nice kind of grimy effect in the recesses, and then leaving that base colour nice and exposed. Obviously I've done this completely on purpose to allow you to see what happens when you let it dry completely. And basically the water and the tissue is just not taking it off at all. I've even tried some acrylic thinners to see if that will do the trick, and it's not even touching it. Now the reason for this is that currently in the UK we've got a massive heat wave on, and it's currently about 39 degrees Celsius or about or roughly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So therefore this stuff has dried even quicker than I expected, and it's cured solid. And because it's cured, I can't take it off at all. So all I can do now is dry brush over that base colour to kind of bring it back a little bit. Okay, so let's try that again, shall we? So this time, as soon as I put it on, I'm going to use that large dry brush, but dampened with water, and going back over it again. And as you can see there, it's now got those grimy deposits in the recesses, and it's given an overall filter, or in other words, it's kind of changed the overall colour slightly to slightly more muted, slightly more grimy. Also, point to note, that's probably the second and the most easiest way that you can use streaking grime is as a filter. Just put it over the entire thing in a really fine layer, and it'll make that paintwork seem a lot more grimier and dirty and grungier. Okay, so on to the third technique that we're going to use today, and this one is arguably the way it was designed to be used, and you'll see this a lot when it comes to scale models, for example, and that is to create streaks of grime. And these kind of grimy streaks occur naturally, especially when something is standing still for a long period of time, and that has that dirt and dust and grime accumulation, and especially when it gets rained on and the rain then takes it down in streaks. So when you're doing these, make sure you're doing it in the direction of gravity. Now there's two ways you can do this. One is that you kind of create lines and streaks going down from top to bottom, and then you apply water with a clean wet brush, and then once again, in a way like a reductive technique, you then sort of just add water to it to dilute it, and that softens the colour and it gives you that streaky effect. Another way you can do it is by applying the streaking grime in dots at the top of the model, and then using a clean wet brush to drag that pigment down the model, and then fades into a nice streak. Now if you're looking for a really realistic effect, then I try and look for areas on the model where the grime and the water would naturally accumulate before then. So especially around a rivet, for example, or in a corner where two pieces of metal come together, like that grime and water will build up, and then gravity will take control and take it streaming down the surface. Okay, so that's the Vallejo streaking grime all applied. Now let's try that AK Interactive. So for the Vallejo, I predominantly used water as a solvent to help streak it out, for example. Now the AK Interactive is an enamel, so you could use white spirit, for example, but today I'm going to use some enamel thinners. So as you can see on this bottle, it is brand new, the seal's not even been broken. Now looking at the colour, it's a lot more of a browny colour compared to the greeny kind of colour you got with the Vallejo. Now one thing to be aware of is I've heard a lot of talk about AK changing its formula every now and again, even with the same product serial number. So that's one thing to be aware of. Now one benefit of this stuff though is because it is enamel, even in this heat it's not going to dry as quickly. But also, as I'm painting it on, it is a lot thicker than the Vallejo streaking grime. So therefore I'm being extra careful and going from top to bottom. So first of all, I want to see how it works as a filter. So therefore I'm going to get a bit of kitchen towel, dampen it in some of those enamel thinners, and try and wipe off the vast majority of it. So as you can see, it's given quite a nice filter to that quite bright beige. It looks a lot dirtier and grimier, and you can see how the dirt has accumulated in those recesses, which does give more definition, but it is softer than you might get with a wash, for example. Okay, so let's try it as a streaking effect. So on this domed part, I'm going to use a variety of brush strokes, some of them thicker, some of them thinner, some of them longer and shorter. Then once that's done, I'll give it a minute or two, and then I'll use a clean brush loaded up with some enamel thinners, and then start dragging it down. Now what I did find with this stuff is that you get a much more subtle effect with a darker colour at the top, and it fades out to the bottom if you're using that brush freshly laden with thinners and dragging it from the bottom up to the top. So using the maximum amount of dilution at the bottom, and it thins out as it goes upwards. So on the main body here, I want to try out that dot technique that I mentioned earlier on. So I'm just going to dab on little dots of that streaking grime, and then get that brush laden with thinners, and then drag it from top to bottom. Okay, so time for the metallics. So first of all, I want to cover it in the streaking grime, and then get that kitchen roll dampened in that enamel thinners, and trying to remove the majority of that streaking grime. Okay, so while that's drying, so far we've got two very different colours, two very different effects, and they handle very differently as well. But how are they on price? Now the AK Interactive, considering that it is a slightly smaller bottle at 35ml, you can currently get it on Amazon for £6.99, which at time of filming is about $8.36 US. Okay, so the Vallejo streaking grime, which is slightly larger at a 40ml bottle, You can currently get on Amazon for £5.56, which at time of filming is about $6.58 US. So based on price alone, the Vallejo is cheaper than the AK Interactive, but they do handle extremely differently. They give different effects. So it really depends on the effect that you're looking for. Now if you don't have a streaking grime, or if you have one of these but you now want to try the other one and you want to find out the current prices so you can get hold of it, then I'll put a link down in the description for both of these. However, especially with the AK Interactive, there are tons of different colours for streaking grime, and they all have their own specific use, and you can actually get these as a set. And if you would like to explore and find a bit more about that, then check out this video right here.